The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 days after we buried my grandmother. I was sitting in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on Dunlop Street, engine running, hands wrapped around a coffee I hadn't touched. The trees along the road had already gone bare. I remember staring at them through the windshield and thinking that Nana would have said something about that, something quiet and exact, the way she always did. That's the thing about maples, sweetheart. They don't hold on. They just let go when it's time. She had a line for everything. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Unknown number, but an Aurelia area code. I almost didn't answer. Ms. Hartley? The voice was careful, professional. This is Raymond O.C. I'm the solicitor handling your grandmother's estate. I was hoping we could find a time to speak. There are some aspects of the will I'd like to walk you through in person. I said yes before I even understood what I was agreeing to. My grandmother, Nana, always Nana, never anything else, had lived in the same house on Penetanguishene Road for 51 years. A 2-story with white aluminum siding and a wraparound porch she never once let go unpainted. She'd raised 4 kids in that house, buried my grandfather from it, and made it clear, somewhere along the way, that she intended to die in it too. She did, 3 weeks before her 83rd birthday, in the hospital bed my aunt had grudgingly agreed to rent for the back bedroom. My mother had passed when I was 11. Cancer, fast and brutal. After that, it was Nana who drove me to school, who sat with me through the hard nights, who showed up at my university convocation with a handmade card and a $20 bill tucked inside, because, she said, everyone needs coffee money when they're celebrating. I moved back to Orleo when I was 28, took a remote job with a property management firm in Toronto so I could be closer to her. My friends thought I was throwing something away. I never saw it that way. The last 2.5 years were harder. Her memory started slipping, then sliding. There were nights she called me by my mother's name and I just answered to it because correcting her made her more afraid. I learned which pharmacies stayed open late. I kept a notebook, a plain yellow one from Staples, where I logged her medications, her appointments, her good days, and her bad ones. I noted what she ate. I noted when she slept. I noted the Tuesday afternoon in February when she looked at me clearly, completely herself, and said, "You know you didn't have to do this." I told her I knew. She said, "Good. Because I need you to know it was a choice, not an obligation. There's a difference." My aunt and uncle arrived the morning of the funeral. They live in Calgary, have for 15 years. My uncle works in energy. My aunt stopped working when their youngest was born and never went back. They're not bad people exactly. They're just people who had learned to be comfortable with distance. My aunt cried at the service, loudly. She held my grandmother's photo and pressed it to her chest, and several of the neighbors touched her arm. I stood at the back and watched and felt something I didn't have a name for yet. After the reception back at the house, my aunt went through the rooms, not grieving, assessing. I noticed her opening the china cabinet in the dining room. I noticed her pausing at the secretary desk where Nana kept her papers. My uncle stood in the kitchen doorway and said, unprompted, that real estate in this part of Simcoe County had really held its value. I went outside and sat on the porch steps and called my best friend and didn't say anything for about a minute. She just stayed on the line. That's the kind of friend she is. The meeting with the solicitor was 4 days after the funeral at his office on Peter Street. My aunt and uncle were already there when I arrived. My aunt had dressed up. My uncle had a notepad. Mr. Bev. Osei was in his early 60s, a careful, deliberate man who reminded me a little of a secondary school principal. He shook my hand and showed me to a chair and set a glass of water on the table in front of me. He opened the file. The house on Penetanguishene Road, he explained, was to be transferred to my aunt and uncle. There was a savings account, modest, a little under $40,000, that was to be divided equally among the grandchildren. There were specific items: the china set to my aunt, the grandfather clock to a cousin in Halifax, a locket to me that had belonged to my great-grandmother. My aunt nodded throughout. Her pen moved across the notepad. My uncle asked 2 questions about the property transfer timeline. Neither of them looked at me. I took the locket home in a small velvet pouch and set it on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time. 2 days later, They changed the locks. I'd kept some things at Nana's house. Not much. A box of my mother's letters that Nana had saved, an old quilt, a few books. I called my aunt to ask when I could come by. She paused in a way that felt rehearsed, and then she said that they were going to need the house cleared out fairly quickly because they'd decided to list it in the spring, and it would probably be easier if I collected my things sooner rather than later. She'd leave a key under the mat. When I got there, the key wasn't under the mat. I knocked. No answer. I tried calling. It rang through. I sat on the porch steps, the same ones I'd sat on the night of the reception, and I looked at the bare maple in the front yard, and I thought about my grandmother telling me that some people only show you who they are, once there's nothing left to lose. I drove home. I didn't call again. My uncle texted me that evening. One line, "We've arranged for a locksmith. The box of letters and the quilt have been set aside for you. You can pick them up at our convenience." At our convenience. I read that 3 times. Then I turned my phone face down on the table and sat in my apartment and felt the specific, hollow kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. The solicitor called me 11 days later. I was at work, working from home, technically, at the small desk I'd wedged into the corner of my living room in front of the window. The same Tim Hortons cup. Different parking lot. "Ms. Hartley," Mr. O.C. said, "I owe you an apology for the delay in contacting you. There were some aspects of your grandmother's estate that required additional verification before I could proceed. I'd like to meet with you again if that's possible. Alone, this time." I said I could come that afternoon. He was waiting when I arrived. The same office, the same careful manner, but something was different. A kind of deliberate stillness, the way someone sits when they're about to say something they've been holding for a while. He set a manila envelope on the desk between us. "Your grandmother updated her estate documents 14 months ago," he said. "What was presented at the initial reading was the primary will. This," he tapped the envelope, "is a secondary directive, a conditional instrument. Your grandmother's instructions were specific. It was only to be opened and disclosed once the conditions within it had either been met or failed to be met. I needed time to confirm which was the case." I looked at the envelope. What were the conditions? He opened it himself and set a single typed page on the desk between us. He let me read it. It took me 2 passes to understand what I was looking at. My grandmother had, over the course of her working life, made careful and consistent investments. Nothing dramatic, GICs, index funds, a few dividend stocks she'd held for decades and never touched. She'd had a financial advisor since the late 80s, a woman named Frances, who'd been sending her a Christmas card every year since Nana's original portfolio had been worth less than most people's car payments. The total, as of the date the document was prepared, was $412,000. My aunt and uncle did not know about this account. I hadn't known either. The conditional directive stated the following: if, in the 5 years preceding her death, any one individual had served as primary caregiver, defined specifically, with a list of criteria that included management of medical appointments, coordination of in-home care, daily or near-daily contact, and documented involvement in health decisions, that individual would receive the investment portfolio in its entirety. The house and primary savings were to be distributed as stated in the original will, with no change. Below the criteria, in a separate paragraph, my grandmother had written, "I know who showed up. I also know who didn't. This is not punishment. This is accuracy." I read that line 3 times. "The criteria," Mr. O.C. said gently, "are met by you. Unambiguously. Your grandmother provided a supporting letter, which I have here, as well as instructions that I request documentation from the caregiving period, medical records, pharmacy receipts, appointment logs to satisfy any future legal challenge." I thought about the yellow notebook from Staples. I thought about all the yellow notebooks because I'd filled 4 of them. I said, "I have logs going back 2.5 years. Mr. Osei nodded slowly. "Then I don't anticipate any complications." I didn't tell my aunt and uncle. Not that day, not the next week. I drove home from Peter Street and I sat in my apartment and I called my best friend, and this time I did say things. Not all of them, not calmly, and she listened and then she said, "What are you going to do with it?" I didn't have an answer yet. My aunt texted twice that week about the box of my mother's letters. She wanted to know if I'd arranged a pickup time. I hadn't. I told her I'd let her know. My uncle called once, missed call, no voicemail. I spent a lot of time that week thinking about my grandmother. Not about the money, or not only about that, but about the woman who had lived 51 years in the same house and raised 4 children and quietly, methodically, over 30-some years, built something she never once mentioned to any of us. She hadn't been hiding it, exactly. She just hadn't offered it. There's a difference, like she said. She understood the difference between things that were her business and things that were everyone else's. I thought about the way she'd looked at me in February, clear-eyed and direct. You know you didn't have to do this. She'd known exactly what she was doing. She'd known for 14 months. She'd sat across from me at her kitchen table and let me pour her tea and check her prescriptions, and drive her to Barrie for her cardiology follow-ups. And she hadn't said a word about any of it because she didn't want obligation. She'd wanted to see what I would do if I thought no one was watching. The solicitor sent formal notification to my aunt and uncle in November. I wasn't there. I didn't want to be. My aunt called me that same evening. The call lasted 4 minutes. I let her say what she needed to say, which was quite a lot. When she'd finished, I said, "I know this is hard. I'm sorry for how hard it is." That was all I said. She hung up. My uncle sent an email that was longer and more measured and CC'd their family lawyer. I forwarded it to Mr. Piercy, Osei, and didn't respond directly. There was a period, about 3 weeks, where it was bad. The emails, the pointed silence from cousins I'd been close to, a conversation with my grandmother's oldest friend at the grocery store that was uncomfortable for both of us. I won't pretend any of that was easy. It wasn't. I cried in my car twice in Azur's parking lot, which is not my finest hour. But I kept coming back to that line. This is not punishment. This is accuracy. She hadn't designed this to hurt them. She'd designed it to be true, and the truth was that I had been there, and they hadn't, and she'd wanted there to be a record of it, not for spite, but because she believed in some fundamental way that things should correspond to reality. In January, I met with a financial advisor, not Frances, who had retired, but a woman at a firm in Barrie, who came recommended by someone I'd met through work. I told her what I was trying to figure out, and she listened carefully and didn't rush me. I kept a portion in index funds, the same way Nana had. Patient money, the advisor called it. I made a contribution to the Aurelia Soldiers Memorial Hospital Foundation, the hospital where my grandmother had been a volunteer for 11 years in the 90s. I set aside enough to pay off the remainder of my student loans, which I did quietly and without ceremony, just a phone call and a transfer, and then sitting down with another coffee and feeling something lighter move through me. I also had the box of my mother's letters picked up, not by me. I asked a friend to go. My aunt handed them over without comment. I don't know what she felt about that. I haven't asked. The quilt is on my couch right now, actually. A cathedral windows pattern in blues and greens that my grandmother made in the 90s. It took her 2 years. She never made another one. I'm not going to tell you that everything resolved cleanly. It didn't. My aunt and I have had one phone call since November. Brief, cordial, like two people who've agreed not to reference the thing that happened. My uncle and I don't speak. I have cousins I used to be close to who've chosen a side, which is their right, and which is also a kind of information I didn't have before. What I can tell you is that I don't lie awake over it, and I don't think that's because I won something. I think it's because my grandmother told me a long time ago that the loneliest thing isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by people who don't see you clearly and pretending that's fine. She saw me clearly. She wrote it down in a document, had it witnessed, and left it with the solicitor on Peter Street. That's as seen as anyone's ever going to get. I still drive past the house on Penetanguishene Road sometimes. It's listed now. One of those clean, staged photos on a real estate website, the rooms emptied and lit to look larger than I remember them. The wraparound porch looks good in the photos. They painted it. Whoever buys it won't know anything about the woman who lived there for 51 years. Won't know about the cathedral windows quilt, or the yellow notebooks, or the February afternoon when she looked at me across the kitchen table and said what she said. But I know. and I think she knew I would carry it. That's the thing about my grandmother. She planned for the long term. She always had. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother actually left me. Not the money. Or not only that. The money was real, and it changed things in ways I'm still adjusting to. But what she left me that I keep coming back to is the idea that paying attention is its own kind of integrity. She paid attention for 82 years. She watched how people behaved when they thought nothing was at stake. She watched who called on a Tuesday for no reason, and who only appeared when there was something to gain. She didn't make a scene about any of it. She didn't keep score out loud. She just noticed, and she acted accordingly, quietly and without drama, in a document on file at a solicitor's office on Peter Street. That's the part that gets me. She didn't wait until the end to feel bitter about it. She wasn't bitter. She was just precise. There's a version of the story where she's an old woman who felt abandoned and wanted to punish the people who left her. That's not the story I lived through. The story I lived through is a woman who understood exactly what she valued and made sure her choices reflected it. That's not punishment. That's just coherence. A life and a legacy that matched each other. I think about the yellow notebooks sometimes. 4 of them, filled front to back with medication logs and appointment records and notes about her good days. I kept them because I didn't want to forget the details, which pill at which time, which symptom to watch for, which topics made her anxious and which ones made her light up. I wasn't keeping them as evidence. It never occurred to me that they'd matter to anyone except me. And I think that's the thing my grandmother understood that I hadn't quite articulated yet. The record of who you are exists, whether you're trying to build one or not. You're always writing it. Every choice is a line. My aunt and uncle made their choices. I don't say that with contempt. I've worked hard not to land there, and mostly I've managed it. They had their reasons for living the way they did, and those reasons made sense to them. But consequences aren't about reasons. They're about what you actually did over time when it wasn't convenient and nobody was watching. I moved back to Orlea at 28 because it was the right thing to do. It cost me something. Friends thought I was stalling, and maybe I was also a little afraid of what my life looked like without the structure of caring for someone. I don't know. What I know is that I'd make the same choice again, not because of how it turned out, but because of who I was while I was doing it. That has to be the reason. If the only reason you show up is because you expect something in return, you haven't really shown up at all. My grandmother knew that. She spent 51 years knowing it. And she sat across from me at her kitchen table in February and looked at me clearly and said, "You know you didn't have to do this." Not to absolve herself of anything, but to make sure I understood that she saw the difference, that it had been a choice, not an obligation. I think that's what I want to carry forward, not the outcome, the standard.